still warm from a hand that didn't want to be seen. At dinner, she'd said it, her voice smooth, rehearsed, "We just can't keep carrying this burden." My son had stared at his plate, his fork unmoving. I folded the notice once, twice, the sound sharp in the silence. They didn't know what I owned. They didn't know me at all. The first years with Robert were framed in the kind of light you only see in old photographs, soft, a little golden, as if time itself had been kinder then. We were young, though we never said so. Youth was not something you announced, it was something you lived without noticing. He had hands that could fix anything, a leaky tap, a broken clock, a bad day, and a way of listening that made even my smallest worries feel worth his time. We married in the spring, when the lilacs were heavy with scent, and settled into a rhythm that was ours alone. Robert worked steady hours at the factory, his lunch packed each morning with care, 2 sandwiches, a thermos of tea, and a small sweet if I had baked the night before. I took pride in keeping our home just so, curtains washed and pressed, shelves dusted, the air faintly perfumed with lemon oil. We didn't have much, but what we had felt complete. The house came 2 years later, a modest 2-story with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged a little on the left. Robert said it had good bones, which was another way of saying we'd spend the next decade tending to it like a stubborn but lovable child. We painted the walls ourselves, learning together that I had the steadier hand while he had the stronger back. Out back was a patch of earth, stubborn with weeds, that I claimed as my garden. It was there, one warm afternoon, that we planted the fig tree. Robert dug while I lowered the young, fragile thing into the ground, its roots like pale fingers reaching for stability. "We'll watch it grow with us," he said, brushing the soil from his hands. That tree became my quiet companion. Each year its branches thickened, and each year I learned patience from it, the kind that comes from knowing growth can't be rushed. Mark was born on an October morning, with rain tapping gently against the window of the small hospital room. Robert's eyes were bright when he first held him, and in that moment, I believed in forever. We brought him home to a nursery smelling faintly of fresh paint and lavender, where the fig tree stood just beyond his window, as if to watch over him. Our days were filled with small rituals, Sunday breakfasts with pancakes, Robert reading the paper while I mended clothes, Mark tumbling through the grass with the neighbor's boy. Summers meant lemonade on the porch, the sound of crickets weaving itself into our evenings. Winters brought the smell of cinnamon bread in the oven, our laughter rising above the hum of the heater. We were not rich, but the richness of those years was in the way Robert would reach for my hand without looking, the way Mark's voice would call out for me before anyone else, the way the fig tree's first fruits seemed like a gift meant just for us. Neighbors became friends, friends became family. We hosted modest gatherings, birthdays with mismatched chairs pulled from every room, Christmases where the smell of pine needles mixed with roasting meat. Robert had a way of making everyone feel welcome, even the shyest guests. I remember standing at the kitchen doorway one New Year's Eve, watching him pour drinks and tell stories, thinking that I had been lucky in ways I hadn't yet learned to measure. There were hardships, of course. The year Robert's hours were cut, we learned to stretch every coin, but we never let worry settle too heavily. When the roof leaked during a storm, we patched it with tar and determination. We were a team, and that made every challenge feel like something we could outlast. Mark grew, as children do, faster than I was ready for. His knees seemed forever scraped, his shoes forever too small. I taught him to bake bread, to tend the fig tree, to say, please, and thank you, without prompting. Robert taught him how to ride a bike, how to throw a ball, how to fix a loose hinge. In those days, I believed that the foundation we had built, brick by brick, habit by habit, would hold for a lifetime. There's a photograph I still keep in a drawer, Robert in his work shirt, Mark perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something I can't recall. The garden behind them is in full bloom, the fig tree's leaves catching the light. That picture is the way I like to remember us, not as we ended, but as we once were, when the house was still our shelter, and love was something we didn't have to question. Looking back now, I realize those years were not just good, they were the scaffolding that held me upright later, when everything began to tilt. At the time, I thought they were simply my life. I didn't yet know they would become the standard against which I measured every moment after. The scent of cinnamon bread still takes me there. The sight of a fig tree in someone else's yard still stops me in my tracks. And when I run my fingers over the worn grain of the old dining table, the same one we bought second-hand in our first year, I can still feel Robert's hand resting on mine, steadying me. Those years were the part of the story where everything fit, where the world seemed manageable, where the people I loved most were always just within reach. And for a long time, I believed it would stay that way. But even the most solid house can develop cracks you don't see until it's too late. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind that Robert and I had once shared in the evenings, sitting with our tea, each lost in our own thoughts, but a hollow quiet, the sort that seeps into spaces where warmth used to be. Robert's passing was sudden. One morning, he kissed me on the cheek before heading out to work, and by noon, a foreman was at my door, his cap twisted in his hands. There are moments that split your life into before and after, and that was mine. The days that followed blurred together, the casserole dishes delivered by neighbors, the church flowers that wilted too quickly, the sound of Mark's muffled sobs behind his bedroom door. I moved through them as if I were walking underwater. Grief became a second skin. It weighed me down, but it also dulled the edges of the world. I still got up each morning, brewed coffee, tended the fig tree. I still kept the house in order, because that was what Robert would have wanted. But inside, the rooms felt emptier, as if they'd lost their echo. Mark was in his early 20s then, just starting to find his own footing in the world. He was good to me in those first months, helping with repairs, checking in before heading out with friends. But as the seasons passed, I noticed a shift. He became busy, his visits to the kitchen quicker, his goodnights more perfunctory. I told myself it was normal. A young man needed to carve out his own life. But sometimes, I'd stand at the sink, drying the same dish for too long, remembering the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, and wonder if I had been too quick to let him drift. It was 2 years after Robert's death when Mark introduced me to Lisa. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind with brass fixtures and the faint scent of roasted coffee that lingers in your clothes. Lisa was beautiful, sleek hair, crisp blouse, the kind of smile that seemed designed for photographs. She shook my hand politely, her grip cool, and called me Mrs. Harris, even after I asked her to call me Margaret. The conversation was pleasant enough, though there was a distance in her tone, as if she were speaking to a colleague rather than the mother of the man she loved. She asked questions, but her eyes wandered, flicking to her phone whenever it buzzed. I told myself she was just nervous, that we all take time to warm up to one another. Over the next few months, I saw her often. She came to Sunday dinners sometimes, complimented the meals, always offered to help with dishes, though she rarely stayed in the kitchen long enough to rinse a plate. She spoke about her work, her goals, her plans for traveling, and I listened, even when her voice carried the faintest thread of condescension. One evening, I caught her rearranging the photographs on the mantel. She moved Robert's portrait to the far end, replacing it with a glossy shot of her and Mark at some gala. She smiled when she saw me watching, but didn't move it back. I left it there, telling myself it was only a picture. Still, it felt like something small but important had been nudged out of place. Mark seemed happy with her, and that mattered to me. So I ignored the little moments, the way she sometimes addressed me without looking up from her phone, the way she sighed if I asked her to repeat herself. But shadows have a way of lengthening when you're not paying attention. There was one night, not long before they married, when Mark came over alone. We sat on the porch, the air cool and smelling faintly of cut grass. He told me Lisa had been offered a promotion, one that might require moving to another city. His voice was proud when he spoke of her, and I smiled, though the thought of him being farther away left a hollow ache in my chest. "Things change, Mom," he said gently, as if sensing my thoughts. "But we'll always make time for you." I nodded, holding on to his words as though they were a promise carved in stone. For a while, life went on. I kept the house as it had always been, the same curtains Robert and I had chosen, the same garden with the fig tree stretching higher each year. Mark and Lisa married in a small ceremony, simple and tasteful. She looked radiant, and I told her so, even when her thank you felt more like an obligation than gratitude. I didn't know then that the distance between us would widen into something far more deliberate. I didn't know that the girl who stood beside my son that day would one day look at me and see only what I cost her. But looking back, I can see the early signs, the cool handshake, the rearranged photograph, the polite smile that never reached her eyes. The first shadow had already fallen. I just hadn't stepped into it yet. It was Mark who brought it up first. We were sitting in my kitchen, my old kitchen, the late afternoon light falling in long strips across the table. The fig tree outside was heavy with summer fruit, and I had just finished wrapping a small basket of them for him to take home. He hesitated before speaking, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug. "Mom, things have been tight lately. With Lisa's schedule and my hours cut back, we've been talking, and we thought maybe you could come stay with us for a while. Just until we get things sorted." I looked at him, searching his face. He meant it kindly, I could tell. But underneath the warmth in his voice, I caught the faint edge of practicality, the kind that comes when life begins to feel more like math than sentiment. "I have my house," I reminded him gently. "It's paid for. And it's close enough to you already." He smiled in that careful way people do when they're about to ask you to do something you won't like. "I know, Mom. But it would help us all. You'd have company. We could save on groceries. And we'd feel better knowing you're not alone." There was no mention of the fact that Lisa's promotion hadn't materialized, or that their condo had a spare room they'd been using as storage. Still, I agreed, not because I needed to, but because saying no felt like it would put a crack in something between us. When I packed, I was deliberate. I took only what I needed: clothes, my sewing basket, a few books, framed photographs of Robert and Mark. I locked the door to my own house, leaving the rooms in quiet order. I did not tell Lisa or Mark that I planned to keep it, that the tenants in my little rental property were paying enough to cover its upkeep. That was my business. Moving in began simply enough. Lisa greeted me at the door with a polite smile, stepping aside as if making room for a delivery. The guest room was clean, the bed made with a crisp white coverlet, the kind that looks nice but feels cold. The first weeks were easy enough. We ate dinner together most nights. Lisa set the table just so, forks aligned, napkins folded into sharp triangles. Conversation was light, mostly about their work, my garden, the weather. Lisa asked me about recipes once or twice, though I noticed she never actually cooked them. It was the little things that began to shift. My coffee mug moved from the front of the cupboard to the back, behind mismatched ones I'd never seen before. My sewing basket was tucked into the closet after I'd left it by my chair in the living room. One afternoon I came home from a walk to find my photographs rearranged on the dresser, Robert's picture now at the far corner, facing the wall. I told myself it was nothing. People have their ways. And I was, after all, in her home now. But there was something in the air, a faint tension, like the way the sky feels just before a storm breaks. Lisa spoke to me politely, but there was no warmth in it, and I noticed she rarely asked me questions that required more than a yes or no. One Saturday, I offered to make breakfast. She smiled tightly. "Oh, that's okay. We've already eaten." The smell of coffee still lingered in the kitchen, and a frying pan sat warm on the stove. Mark didn't notice, or perhaps he didn't want to. He'd kiss my cheek on his way out the door, promise to call if they were going to be late. But more and more, I found myself eating alone, the polite invitations of those first weeks replaced with vague mentions of plans and work dinners. The condo began to feel less like a shared home and more like a place I was passing through, careful not to leave too much of myself in sight. I took longer walks, spending hours in the park or visiting my old neighborhood. Sometimes I would pass my own house, the white paint now slightly weathered, and feel a pull in my chest. One afternoon, I stopped by my rental property, a small, well-kept house a few blocks away from my own. My tenants, an older couple, told me they were planning to move closer to their daughter by the end of the year. I wished them well and tucked the information away in my mind. Back at the condo, Lisa was on the phone, her voice light and bright in a way it never was with me. She ended the call quickly when she saw me, her smile brief, almost perfunctory. I went to my room and closed the door. I told myself I could live with this arrangement for a while. That I could swallow the small slights, the quiet shifts, for the sake of keeping peace. But in the stillness of my room, I knew something else: storms do not stay on the horizon forever. And this one was moving closer. It began with the outings I didn't know about until after they happened. One Saturday morning, I came into the kitchen to find Lisa rinsing coffee cups, her hair still damp from a shower. She was dressed in that casual yet curated way she favored, jeans pressed sharp, a cream sweater without a single pull in the knit. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Oh, yes, brunch with friends," she said, glancing at her watch. "Sorry, I thought Mark told you." He hadn't. I smiled anyway, though the truth was, I'd been up early, waiting for the smell of coffee to draw me out, ready to share a slow morning together. It happened again the next week, a last-minute mention of dinner plans as they were halfway out the door. "We didn't think you'd be interested," Lisa said once, her tone airy, as though she were sparing me from some tedious obligation. I started eating more meals alone, though I never said I minded. In truth, I minded very much. It wasn't about the meal, it was about the way I'd gone from guest to ghost without even realizing when it happened. The grocery incident came not long after. Lisa returned from the market with 2 bulging bags and set them on the counter. She unpacked milk, eggs, fresh herbs, a paper bag of still warm bread. Then, with her back to me, she said, "Do you think you could pitch in for the groceries this week? I mean, you are eating with us sometimes, and it's just fair." It wasn't the request that stung, I was more than capable of paying my way, it was the way she said it, in front of Mark, who sat scrolling his phone at the table. As though I were some reluctant boarder she needed to keep in line. I nodded, slipped my wallet from my bag, and placed a few bills on the counter. Lisa smiled thinly, as if a minor inconvenience had been tidied away. The worst moment came during a dinner she hosted for a few friends. The table was immaculate, linen napkins, candles flickering low, the scent of rosemary roasted chicken filling the room. Conversation was lively, laughter spilling over wine glasses. I kept mostly quiet, listening, smiling when spoken to. And then, without preamble, she said it. "It's been a bit of an adjustment, having Margaret stay with us. It's just, you know, an extra expense." She laughed lightly, as though it were a joke, but her eyes never softened. The words hung in the air like smoke. One of her friends glanced at me, then quickly away. Mark said nothing, didn't even look up from his plate. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "I'm sure it's been an adjustment for everyone," I said, and took a sip of water. Inside, something tightened, not hurt, not yet anger, but a deep, quiet resolve I didn't recognize at the time. From then on, I began withdrawing in small ways. I stopped cooking meals for the household, keeping my food labeled in the refrigerator. I began spending more afternoons out, walking through my old neighborhood, stopping at the library, visiting the small cafe Robert and I once frequented. When I came home, I moved quietly through the condo, so quietly I imagined they might forget I was there at all. It suited Lisa. It gave me room to think. It was on one of those walks that I passed my rental property again. The tenants had begun packing boxes, the curtains half drawn. The "for rent" sign I'd had in storage for years flashed across my mind, but I didn't retrieve it, not yet. Instead, I went home and sat by my window, looking out at the street lamps blinking on. I thought about Robert, about how he would have hated seeing me treated this way. I thought about the fig tree, still growing in my own garden, untended but strong. I realized then that storms aren't always loud when they arrive. Sometimes they settle in quietly, filling the air so gradually you don't realize you're breathing them until you can't remember what it felt like before. And I also realized that I didn't have to stay standing in the middle of one. If your own child's spouse spoke about you like you weren't even in the room, how would you react? Retaliation can be loud, but mine began in silence. After that dinner, where Lisa had labeled me an extra expense in front of her friends, something in me shifted. Not in an explosive way, there was no shouting, no slammed doors, but in the quiet, deliberate turning of a key inside myself. A decision to stop giving her the ease of my cooperation. The first thing I did was reclaim my meals. I stopped cooking for all of us. Instead, I made my breakfast early, before they stirred, and my dinners late, after the clink of their plates had faded. My recipes became simpler, scaled down to 1 or 2 servings. I wrapped my portions tightly in foil and labeled them with a neat black marker, Margaret. The sight of my name on those little parcels was a reminder, to me, and perhaps to her, that I did not rely on her for sustenance, in any sense of the word. I removed my things from her kitchen drawers, placing them in a box I kept under my bed. No more of my wooden spoons left in her utensil jar, no more of my spices lined up beside hers. It was petty, maybe. But it meant that when she opened a drawer, she no longer touched anything of mine. When I wasn't cooking, I was walking. My routes grew longer, down to the river, across to the park, back through the streets of my old neighborhood. I would pass my own house, still rented out, and linger just long enough to see the fig tree through the side gate. Even from a distance, I could tell it had grown since I'd last stood under it. One afternoon, curiosity pulled me past my rental property, the smaller place I'd kept quietly all these years. My tenants, an older couple, were out front, sorting through boxes. They told me, with a mixture of sadness and excitement, that they were moving to Arizona to be near their grandchildren. I offered my congratulations and let them know I'd manage the listing myself when the time came. Lisa didn't know about this house. Neither did Mark. Over the years, I'd learned that some things are better kept in the quiet, like a candle unlit until you need its light. At home, Lisa continued her small encroachments. She began leaving my bedroom door closed when I returned from walks, though I never closed it myself. My coffee mug disappeared from the cupboard entirely. I found it a week later in the back of the pantry, behind a box of tea I'd never seen before. I didn't confront her. Confrontation would have given her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. Instead, I began answering her clipped remarks with a smile, one that I'm sure infuriated her more than any argument could have. Mark, oblivious or unwilling to see the tension, continued as before, work, quick meals at home, evenings out with friends. When he did notice my absence from certain dinners or outings, would say simply, "Oh, I had other plans." In truth, my plans were forming like threads on a loom, quiet, steady, pulling together into something stronger than either of them could imagine. One evening, Lisa brought up money again. She leaned in the kitchen doorway while I washed a plate. "You know, Margaret, it would really help if you could contribute a bit more toward the bills. It's only fair." I set the plate in the rack and dried my hands, meeting her eyes. "I'll consider that," I said evenly. "Though I may be moving out soon." Her expression flickered, a brief flash of surprise, quickly masked. "Oh? Really? Well, I'm sure you'll be happier with your own space." I nodded, as if I hadn't noticed the faint brightness in her tone, the way her posture eased. After that, she seemed lighter, almost cheerful around me, as though she could already picture the guest room reclaimed for whatever she wanted it for. I didn't correct her assumption. Let her think I was leaving because I couldn't afford to stay, or because I had nowhere else to go. Let her think she'd won. Meanwhile, I began meeting with my realtor, discreetly, in a small office across town. We reviewed the paperwork for my rental property, discussed market rates, and drafted a plan for listing it. Every detail was handled in quiet professionalism. Every step was one she didn't see. It wasn't a loud retaliation, not yet. But it was mine. And like the fig tree, I was patient. Storms can knock down branches in a day, but roots work in silence, and they hold on until the time is right. The moment I mentioned I might be moving out, something in Lisa shifted. Her tone softened, not toward kindness, but toward a kind of eager civility, as though she were already rehearsing her life without me in it. She began making casual remarks about redecorating the spare room and, finally getting some space back. I smiled, nodded, and let her picture it however she pleased. I gave her no details. When she asked where I might be moving, I said only, somewhere quiet, somewhere with light. That answer seemed to satisfy her, though I could see the question itch behind her eyes. I began withholding in earnest. Not just my cooking, but my presence. I stopped sharing small details of my day. If she asked where I'd been, I'd reply with a vague, just out, and leave it at that. The less she knew, the more her curiosity gnawed at her, and the more she filled in the blanks with her own assumptions. From the outside, I imagine I seemed subdued, perhaps even defeated. But inside, I was watching. I watched how she treated the delivery man, a brisk, dismissive wave as she signed for a package. I watched how she spoke to Mark when he was tired, her voice sharper, her sentences clipped. I noticed her growing impatience when she thought I was taking too long in the kitchen, the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, sighing without saying a word. Small observations, stored away. When I wasn't watching, I was walking, not for leisure now, but with purpose. I visited my old neighborhood more often, sometimes lingering near my own house. The tenants still there waved if they saw me, unaware that their time in that home was part of a larger clock quietly ticking. The rental property, the one Lisa didn't know existed, was coming into play. I spoke with my realtor again, confirming that the couple would be out by the end of the month. We discussed repainting the interior, small improvements that would lift its appeal. It was in a desirable neighborhood, one with good schools, cafes within walking distance, the very kind of place Lisa often mentioned when talking about their someday home. One evening, Mark came home late, his shoulders sagging under the weight of a long day. He sat at the kitchen table with me while Lisa was in the other room on a video call. I poured him tea, the way I had when he was a boy, and asked how things were. He sighed. "We've been thinking, maybe it's time to find a bigger place. Somewhere with a yard. Lisa's been talking about it non-stop." I only nodded, though inside, something clicked into place. I could see the path now, clear as the trail I walked each morning. In the days that followed, I said little but listened more. Lisa mentioned square footage, school districts, even though they had no children, and the importance of good natural light. I stored each detail away, like a bird gathering twigs for a nest. At the condo, our interactions became almost ritualistic. She'd pass me in the hallway with a nod, I'd return it. She'd make offhand comments about the market and how expensive things are getting, and I'd agree mildly. Always mild. Always agreeable. What she didn't see was the quiet arrangement unfolding behind the scenes. My realtor had begun quietly advertising the rental, and though I hadn't shared the address with Lisa or Mark, I made sure the listing photos highlighted every feature she'd mentioned she wanted. I knew she would come across it eventually. The act of withholding, my plans, my property, my intentions, gave me a strange sort of calm. I no longer felt the constant need to defend myself or explain my choices. I was no longer playing the part of the grateful guest. And in that quiet, I could see her more clearly than ever, the ambition that glinted like glass, the small cruelties tucked into her pleasantries, the way she measured people by what they cost her. I watered my own patience the way I had once watered the fig tree, trusting that when the time came, the fruit of this waiting would be worth it. She thought I was fading from her world. In truth, I was building a doorway, one she would walk through willingly, never realizing I had the key. It happened over dinner, as these things often do, not in the heat of an argument, but in the slow, deliberate cruelty of a public remark. Mark had suggested inviting a few relatives over. It had been months since I'd seen most of them, and the idea warmed me. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, rolling dough for bread, simmering a pot of tomato soup the way Robert used to like it. Lisa was polite enough while we set the table, but I could feel her gaze grazing over every detail I touched, as if measuring it against her own invisible standard. By the time guests arrived, the condo was filled with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of cutlery, the scent of rosemary and fresh bread. I sat at the far end of the table, answering questions about my garden, about how I was adjusting to living here. I kept my answers light, careful not to give Lisa anything to twist. And then, halfway through the meal, someone asked when I might move back to my own place. Lisa's voice slid in before I could answer. "Oh, Margaret's fine here for now," she said, her tone sweet enough to fool someone who didn't know her. "It's just, well, it is a bit of a strain. Financially, I mean. An extra mouth to feed, an extra load of laundry. We're managing, but, you know." She laughed lightly, as though inviting others to join in. No one did. The room tilted, just slightly. I could feel every eye slide toward me, then away. My son, my only child, kept his gaze fixed on his plate. He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. I folded my napkin slowly, smoothing the fabric beneath my fingers. My pulse was steady, steadier than I expected. I thought of Robert, of the years we'd spent building a home where no one would have dared to speak to me that way. I thought of the fig tree, of its patient, stubborn growth. I did not answer her remark. Not there, not in front of them. But inside, something turned hard and sharp, like a lock snapping into place. When the meal ended, I excused myself early, slipping into my room while laughter rose again from the table. I sat at my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my most important papers, deeds, insurance policies, the folder for my rental property. My fingers hovered over the embossed edge of the title deed. The tenants would be gone in 2 weeks. The house would be empty, freshly painted, ready for the right occupants. I reached for a blank sheet of paper and began drafting an offer letter, a formal invitation to apply for tenancy. It would list the property's features: spacious rooms, abundant light, a private garden with a fruit tree in the back. I did not write the address, not yet. I could already see it, Lisa scrolling through listings late at night, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the kitchen, the yard. I could see her convincing Mark that this was the place they'd been dreaming of. The beauty of it was that she would come to me. She would walk into the space, imagine her life there, and never suspect that it was mine. That night, I slept better than I had in months. In the days that followed, I was quiet, deliberate. I smiled when spoken to, excused myself when conversation turned sharp. I took my walks as usual, stopping by the property to check on the repainting. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh plaster and lemon cleaner, a clean slate in every sense. I thought about the fig tree there, smaller than the one in my old garden but just as stubborn. I ran my fingers over its leaves, imagining Lisa doing the same one day, never knowing whose hands had planted it. The breaking point wasn't the insult itself. I had endured enough of those to grow calluses where they landed. No, the real fracture was seeing my son, my own blood, choose the comfort of his silence over the dignity of his mother. That silence would be the thing I remembered when I handed them the keys. If your child's spouse humiliated you in front of your own family, would you walk away, or make them regret it? The days after that dinner felt different, lighter, somehow, as though I'd quietly stepped out of a role I'd been playing without realizing it. I was no longer the grateful guest, no longer the woman trying to blend seamlessly into the corners of Lisa's life. I was something else now, a woman with a plan. And plans, I've learned, are best fed in silence. I began by visiting the rental house more often. The tenants had moved out earlier than expected, leaving the rooms echoing and clean. I walked through each one slowly, noting what needed attention: a squeaky hinge, a loose tile in the kitchen, a coat of paint in the master bedroom. I hired a handyman I trusted, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about my sudden urgency. The house was in a desirable neighborhood, one of those tree-lined streets where children ride their bikes in the late afternoon and couples walk their dogs after dinner. A small cafe sat on the corner, its window boxes spilling over with flowers. The property itself had a wide bay window in the living room, a sturdy front porch, and a garden in back, not large, but private, with a fig tree just beginning to fruit. It was the kind of place Lisa often described without realizing she was giving me a blueprint. Over the months, I'd heard her wistfully mention a proper yard, a bright kitchen, and a neighborhood with character. I had all three, and soon, she would know it. I met with my realtor again in the quiet of her office. We went over the listing details, the photographs she'd had taken, the sunlit kitchen, the polished floors, the garden framed by that fig tree. "It's going to go quickly," she said, tapping the papers. "I'm counting on it," I replied. Back at the condo, I played my part. I came and went without explanation, never mentioning the property. When Lisa asked about my plans to move out, I offered only vague answers. Looking at a few places, I'd say with a shrug, as though it were nothing worth her interest. But I listened. Always listening. Over dinner one night, she told Mark she'd seen a listing online that looked promising, but was probably out of their budget. She described it in detail, right down to the charming garden with some kind of fruit tree. I didn't need to ask which property she meant. 2 days later, I asked my realtor to arrange a showing. Not for me, of course, for a young couple she hadn't yet met. On the day of the viewing, I made myself scarce. I went for a walk along the river, the winter air cool against my cheeks, and thought about Robert. He would have laughed at the sheer poetry of it, the way a situation could be turned without ever raising your voice. When I returned that evening, Lisa was in the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "We saw a place today," she told Mark as I passed through. "It's perfect. I mean, really perfect. And the rent is, well, it's a stretch, but I think we can make it work." I didn't pause, didn't smile, didn't ask a single question. I simply poured myself a cup of tea and carried it to my room, my pulse steady. That night, I reviewed the lease agreement with my realtor. Every clause was airtight: late payment penalties, maintenance responsibilities, notice requirements. Professional. Impersonal. The way business should be. In the quiet of my room, I took the deed from my drawer and looked at it under the lamplight. My name in black ink, clear and permanent. I thought about Lisa holding a pen soon, writing her own name under mine without realizing the order of things had just changed. Preparation isn't just about the paperwork, though. It's about patience. It's about letting someone think they are moving freely, while you've already laid out the path under their feet. I didn't rush it. I let the days pass, Lisa's anticipation building, Mark's interest peaked. I let them imagine their lives there, the dinner parties, the lazy Sundays, the fresh figs in summer. And all the while, I kept the key in my pocket, knowing they would come to me for it. It began with a casual remark, tossed into conversation like an afterthought. We were in the kitchen one evening, Lisa scrolling on her phone while Mark reheated leftovers. I set my teacup down and said, "You know, I heard about a place coming up for rent. Friend of a friend situation. Nice neighborhood. Big kitchen. Little garden in back." Lisa's eyes flicked up from her screen, quick and sharp. "Oh? Where?" I shrugged as if it were nothing. "A few blocks over from here. Tree-lined street. Older house, but well kept. They haven't even listed it yet." Her posture shifted, the subtle lean forward of someone who's just scented an opportunity. Do you have an address? Not on me, I said, turning toward the kettle. But I could probably get you the details if you're interested. She didn't try to hide her interest. We've been talking about moving, she said, glancing at Mark for confirmation. He nodded, though his expression was wary, as though he sensed the bait even if he couldn't see the hook. Over the next few days, I let her bring it up. Each time, I'd add another small detail, plenty of natural light, one day, quiet neighbors, the next. By the third mention, she was the one asking when she might be able to see it. That was when I called my realtor. Show them the house, I said. But don't say my name. Not yet. The viewing was set for a Saturday morning. I made sure I wouldn't be home when they left, sparing myself the small talk. Instead, I walked to the cafe near the property, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window where I could see the front steps without being seen myself. Right on time, they arrived. Lisa stepped out of the car first, dressed like she was already meeting the neighbors, hair perfect, scarf knotted just so. Mark followed, slower, scanning the house with that cautious, practical eye he'd inherited from Robert. The realtor greeted them warmly, unlocking the door with a flourish. I watched from my corner as they stepped inside. 15 minutes later, they were in the garden. Even from a distance, I could see Lisa's face light up when she spotted the fig tree. She reached out to touch a branch, testing the leaves between her fingers the way I used to. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. She was already picturing herself here, summer dinners on the porch, friends gathered in the yard, fruit from her tree. When they returned to the car, she was animated, her hands moving as she spoke to Mark. He listened, nodding slowly, the beginnings of a smile tugging at his mouth. That evening, she brought it up over dinner. We saw that house today, she said, unable to keep the thrill out of her voice. It's perfect. The kitchen's huge, the garden's gorgeous, and the rent is, well, it's high, but I think we can manage. Mark looked at me briefly, just for a moment, as if trying to gauge something in my expression. I only smiled faintly and took a sip of water. The next day, my realtor called. They're interested, she said, a note of amusement in her voice. Want me to prepare the paperwork? Yes, I told her. And arrange the signing for later this week. I'll be there. The trap was set. It hadn't taken lies or manipulation, just a few carefully placed truths, allowed to grow roots in the right soil. Lisa thought she had found the house by chance, that she was seizing an opportunity before someone else could take it. She had no idea the opportunity had been built for her, shaped around her own words and wants. And when she signed those papers, she would step into the reality she had chosen, one in which every month, without fail, she would write my name on a check. I thought of the fig tree again. You don't force its growth. You prune it when needed, water it when the soil dries, and trust that in time, the fruit will come. In my case, the fruit was nearly ripe. The signing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at my realtor's office, a small, tidy place with soft lighting and the faint scent of paper and ink. I arrived early, taking a seat in the corner chair, my bag resting neatly on my lap. My realtor knew the plan, of course, and offered me a discreet nod before heading out to greet them. I heard Lisa's voice before I saw her, bright, eager, just a touch impatient. I hope we can get this wrapped up quickly. We've got a dinner reservation tonight. They stepped inside, both dressed in their best version of casual polish. Lisa's hair was perfectly smoothed back, her lipstick carefully chosen to suggest effortlessness. Mark wore a pressed shirt, though his collar sat slightly askew, a small detail that made my chest ache with memory. They didn't see me at first. They sat at the polished conference table, leaning over the stack of papers laid out before them. My realtor began walking them through the terms, rent amount, security deposit, maintenance responsibilities. Lisa nodded at all the right places, occasionally glancing at Mark for reassurance. Then came the lease itself. My realtor flipped to the page where the landlord's information was printed. "Here's the name of the property owner," she said smoothly, "and here's where you'll be signing." Lisa's gaze skimmed the page. It stopped. Her eyebrows pinched just slightly. She read the name again, her lips pressing together. Mark noticed first. "Mom?" His voice was quiet, more question than greeting. Lisa looked up at me then, her expression caught between confusion and disbelief. This is your house?" I folded my hands on the table, keeping my voice gentle. "Yes. I thought it might suit you both." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the overhead lights. Lisa recovered first, though the brightness in her tone was thinner now. "Well, I didn't realize," she trailed off, glancing at Mark, then back at the page in front of her. Mark looked from her to me, his brow furrowed. "Why didn't you say anything?" I met his eyes steadily. "I wanted you to choose it for yourselves. I wouldn't want you to feel burdened." His mouth opened, closed. He leaned back in his chair. Lisa cleared her throat, the color high in her cheeks. "Well, the house is lovely," she said, her voice taut around the edges. "And the terms seem fair." My realtor, ever professional, slid the pen across the table. "If you're ready, you can sign here." Lisa hesitated for only a moment before picking up the pen. She signed her name in a practiced flourish, then handed it to Mark. He signed more slowly, his signature deliberate, almost hesitant. When the last paper was in place, my realtor gathered the stack, clipped it neatly, and handed them their copy. "Congratulations," she said brightly. I stood, slipping my bag over my arm. "I'll look forward to hearing how you settle in," I said, meeting Lisa's eyes. There was no malice in my tone, just the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly where they stand. She managed a tight smile. "I'm sure we'll make it home." As they left, I stayed behind for a moment, the soft click of the door closing echoing in the quiet office. My realtor turned to me with a knowing look. "That," she said, "was something to witness." I only smiled. On my way back to the condo, I thought about the months that had led here, the small humiliations, the careful patience, the pruning of every unnecessary word. Lisa would never admit the irony, but she would live it every month, in ink and paper, in checks addressed to my name. And for me, that was more than enough. If you had the chance to become your critic's landlord, would you take it, or walk away? The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in small, almost imperceptible ways, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. But I was watching. Lisa was different after the lease signing. Not openly hostile, she didn't dare, not now, but careful. Her sentences with me grew shorter, her voice tighter, as though every word had to be measured before it left her mouth. She no longer spoke to me with the unguarded ease of someone who believed herself above me. Instead, there was a faint edge of restraint, as if she'd suddenly remembered there was more than one kind of authority in a home. Mark, for his part, seemed unsettled. He visited me more often in the days that followed, knocking on my door in the evenings with a cup of tea or a casual question about my day. Sometimes, he'd linger in the doorway, as though there was more he wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. We didn't discuss the lease. We didn't discuss the fact that his wife now answered to me in a way she never could have imagined. But the knowledge was there, unspoken, shaping the air between us. I moved into a small apartment not far from the house. It suited me, a cozy place with soft afternoon light and enough room for my sewing basket, my books, and the framed photographs I'd chosen to take. The rest remained in storage, the physical pieces of a life I no longer needed to display in order to remember. From my window, I could see the tops of trees swaying in the wind. I liked the privacy, the quiet, the knowledge that I could close my door at night and hear nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. But I also liked knowing that only a short walk away, Lisa was arranging her life inside walls that were mine. The first month's rent arrived on time. My realtor handled the transaction, as we'd agreed, keeping everything professional. Still, I noticed the way Lisa avoided my eyes the next time we saw each other, her smile thin and fleeting. A few weeks later, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Mark was standing there, hands in his pockets. "Lisa's been stressed," he said after a moment. "The move, work, everything. She didn't expect." "Didn't expect what?" I asked softly. He shifted, his gaze dropping. "I guess she didn't realize she'd be renting from you. She feels awkward." I studied him for a long moment. "That's her business to work through," I said finally. "I'm her landlord, not her judge." He nodded, though his shoulders sagged just slightly, as though he'd been hoping for a different answer. We spoke for a few more minutes, about the garden, about the fig tree, and then he left, his steps slow on the walkway. From that point on, I noticed a subtle reversal in our interactions. When Lisa needed something for the house, a repair, a replacement, the request came through Mark, never directly to me. When we crossed paths at family gatherings, she was polite, almost studiously so, as though careful courtesy might erase the memory of every barb she'd thrown my way. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in humiliating her, it was in the quiet certainty that I'd reclaimed the ground she'd tried to take from me. Every month, she'd sign her name to a check made out to mine, a silent acknowledgement of the shift neither of us would ever speak aloud. I went about my days contentedly. I visited my garden at my old home, pruning the fig tree and planting winter herbs. I baked bread, not because anyone else expected it, but because I wanted to. I met with friends for coffee, walked through the park when the air was crisp, let the seasons move at their natural pace. And in the quiet moments, when I thought of Lisa standing in her bright new kitchen, arranging her life under my roof, I felt no bitterness. Only a kind of steady, grounded satisfaction, the kind you feel when you've set something right without shouting, without spectacle, just by knowing exactly where to plant the seed. It happened in the third month. The rent payment, which had arrived punctually for 2 cycles, was late. Only by 3 days, but late nonetheless. My realtor sent the standard notice, polite, factual, without flourish. There was a late fee, modest but firm, already written into the lease they had both signed without hesitation. 2 days after that, there was a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, Lisa stood there, her smile pulled tight, a small envelope in her hand. "I thought I'd deliver this in person," she said, extending the payment. The oversight was due to a mix-up with the bank. I took the envelope without opening it. "Thank you. The late fee's been included, I trust?" Her cheeks flushed faintly. "Yes." We stood there for a moment, the quiet between us thick with all the things neither of us would ever say aloud. She glanced past me into my apartment, her gaze landing briefly on the potted fig cutting on my windowsill, a small branch I'd rooted from the tree at my old home. "It's thriving," she said. "Yes," I replied evenly. "It's in good soil." She nodded once, then turned to leave. No argument. No protest. Just the weight of knowing that, in this arrangement, I set the terms. From then on, the payments arrived without delay. And each time I saw Lisa, at Mark's birthday dinner, at Easter brunch, her demeanor was changed. Still polite, still outwardly composed, but tempered. There was no more casual dismissal, no more careless remarks about extra expenses or burdens. I didn't need her to like me. I didn't even need her respect. What I needed, what I had, was the knowledge that she could no longer treat me as if I were dependent on her goodwill. The final justice wasn't in the rent money. It wasn't even in the small penalties she paid when things slipped. It was in the way the balance between us had settled, permanently altered. She lived under a roof I owned, tended a garden I had planted, picked fruit from a tree whose roots went deeper than she would ever see. One afternoon, while visiting Mark, I found her in that garden. She was crouched near the fig tree, her hands in the soil, pulling weeds. She looked up as I approached, her expression guarded but not hostile. "It's coming in well this year," she said, gesturing to the branches heavy with fruit. "It's a good tree," I replied. "Strong roots." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. For a moment, we stood there in the dappled shade, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. I left soon after, walking away with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has reclaimed not just their dignity, but their place. Justice had come without shouting, without spectacle, only the steady, undeniable truth of ownership. And in that truth, I was free. If you could make someone who disrespected you answer to you every month, would you? It is late summer now, and the air is heavy with the scent of ripening fruit. From the sidewalk, I can see the garden of the house, my house, where Lisa kneels beside the fig tree. The branches are full, bending slightly under their own weight. She wears a wide-brimmed hat, her hair tucked neatly beneath it, and she moves with the quiet focus of someone tending something they want to keep alive. She doesn't see me. I don't stop. I walk slowly past, my hand brushing against the top of the low fence, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. The image stays with me, Lisa, in the dappled light, plucking the fruit I planted decades ago. It's strange, the way roots work. You can't see them, but they're there, holding everything steady through storms, feeding life from the dark. The house, the tree, even the ground beneath it, all of it carries my mark, though it no longer needs my hand to guide it. I think of Robert, of the years we spent building something solid together. I think of Mark as a boy, chasing a ball through that very garden, the fig tree still thin and young behind him. I think of how easily someone else might have taken my place in the story, if I had let them. But I didn't. In my apartment, the small fig cutting on my windowsill has put out 2 new leaves. I touch them gently, they're green, soft and fresh. It will take years before it bears fruit, but I don't mind. I've learned that some things are worth the wait. Every month, without fail, a check arrives with my name on it, not as a gift, not as charity, but as a simple fact. The rent is paid, the lease upheld, the balance kept. I don't gloat. I don't need to. My justice isn't loud. It's in the quiet moments, the rooted ones, when I remember that I am not a burden. I am the foundation. And I always will be.